Morning. It is a gorgeous day in Minnesota. And you want to know something great? It's already Wednesday. Fuck. The good thing about having a long weekend, I think it's just having the short week is just like the icing on the cake there, So you should always have your vacations end on Monday. That way you only have to work Tuesday through Friday there. Yeah. We'll hop right into it here.
Nobel laureate Kenneth Arrow, and he said, in every commercial transaction, there is an element of trust. Trust is also called social capital, and economists and sociologists and political scientists, they study this, and what they've said is, look, trust, high levels of trust, that's fertile ground for building national corporations, multinational corporations. Trust within organizations encourages teams. If there's a lot of social capital, there's a lot of trust, people are more willing to do business with one another, take commercial risks, finance innovation, and of course, vice versa.
One of the reasons we've been having this conversation is that you and I have both seen polls that suggest that levels of trust are declining among Americans. Americans distrust their government increasingly.
Good.
They distrust their financial institutions, bigger businesses. They distrust the media, sometimes even the courts. Does that actually have an economic effect?
I think so, and that's why I started doing this research. And I went back and looked at a lot of the trust and social capital research done after the Great Recession. And what they found, like many other people, is that the Great Recession had a negative impact on trust. Everyone seems less trustful these days. And my concern is that this trust is undermining the economy at really a very vulnerable period of time.
Well, give me an example. If a business is thinking about possibly making an investment or not, if there's not enough trust, maybe they might not invest, something like that?
Well, that seems to be one of the explanations. Why is business investment, which is really the wellsprings of future economic growth, why is business investment, relatively stagnant, considering we have these low interest rates, we have this massive corporate tax cut? Business leaders seem less trustful about the future.
I remember when the last financial crisis unfolded, people who trusted authorities to keep the financial system under control, you lost the trust. And for a time, people were much more cautious in some of their decisions.
And I think this is the real impact of trust. We don't know when the recession is going to hit. It's part of the conversation right now. But when the downturn hits, fiscal policy isn't going to come to the rescue like it did back in the Great Recession. And the Fed just seems diminished these days. And I think that's something to worry about.
Marketplace's senior economics contributor, Chris Farrell, who joins us from St. Paul. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot.
And in New York, I'm David Brancaccia. This is the Marketplace Morning Report from APM, American Public Media.
On the next NPR News Presents, it's a new documentary from the Humankind series.
They talk about how there was so much less investment going on for private businesses. Not even a year ago, they were talking about why we have so few IPOs, initial public offerings, and it's because there's so much available money out there.
Ray McAbee, retired principal from Central High in St. Paul, they'll join Angela Davis at 11 o'clock and talk about the new school year, some of the issues facing educators, what needs to change, what parents and teachers can do to make sure their students have a successful year. First day of school is yesterday. Tomorrow is first day of school for kindergartners. Yeah, remember that? We will talk about all that coming up at 11 o'clock here on NPR News. 91.1, KNOW, Minneapolis, St. Paul. Here in the Twin Cities metro area, clouds 58, high today, 70, partly cloudy skies. Tomorrow's high, close to 80. Rescue operations are underway in the Bahamas in the wake of Hurricane Dorian. 7 deaths have been reported, but the full scope of the devastation is not yet known. I'm Kathy Worzer. It's Wednesday, September the 4th, and this is Morning Edition on NPR. This hour, the latest from the Bahamas, where a Red Cross spokesman estimates more than 13,000 homes have been damaged or destroyed, and what recent upheaval in Britain's parliament means for Brexit and the future of Prime Minister Boris Johnson. Contestants were encouraged to come on down and play The Price is Right. The TV game show with host Bob Barker had its debut on this date in 1972 on CBS. Today's birthdays include pro golfer Tom Watson. He turned 70 years old. It's 8:01, and the news is next.
I'm running a little late.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Corva Coleman. The National Hurricane Center says Hurricane Dorian is paralleling the Florida coast as it moves north. It's about 135 miles southeast of Jacksonville. Top sustained winds are at 105 miles per hour. Although hurricane warnings are up in the state of Georgia, some people there are defying mandatory evacuation orders. NPR's Bobby Allen reports they're securing their homes and hoping for the best.
Tybee Island is the easternmost point of the coast of Georgia, where even the city hall is completely boarded up. After drilling a giant piece of plywood in the front of his oceanfront home, Neil Estroff says the forecasts are putting him on edge.
Where it has Dorian coming straight up and sometimes hitting right at about Georgia-South Carolina border, which that is not good news for us. And truthfully, I would like for it to go out to sea so it doesn't affect any other humans. So I wish it would just head out and play with the fish.
Elsewhere in the Savannah area, pickup trucks full of sandbags were on their way to residential homes, and interstate highways have been choked with traffic from everyone trying to flee the wrath Dorian might bring. Bobby Allen, NPR News, Tybee Island, Georgia.
The nation's largest retailer, Walmart, says it will stop selling ammunition for handguns and certain semi-automatic rifles. From member station KCUR, Chris Haxel has more.
They've been
For
reporting on
years,
that for
Walmart has taken incremental steps to restrict firearms sales. First, it stopped selling handguns everywhere but Alaska. Then it dropped assault-style weapons. Last year, Walmart stopped selling guns and ammunition to teenagers. Now the company has announced its most sweeping changes to date. Walmart will no longer sell ammo used by military-style rifles, it will abandon handgun sales completely, and it will stop selling ammunition used by handguns, which account for most of the country's homicides. In a statement, CEO Doug McMillon said Walmart feels a responsibility to help change the status quo. He also called on lawmakers to strengthen background checks and pass other gun control measures.
No, go fuck yourself.
For NPR News, I'm Chris Haxel.
Hong Kong's chief executive says she is withdrawing a controversial bill from consideration. Carrie Lam is pulling a bill that would allow suspects in Hong Kong to be transferred to mainland China to stand trial. The legislation has triggered months of sometimes violent protest in Hong Kong. NPR's Emily Fang says the decision has come as a shock.
It is a big surprise, especially given recent reporting that Carrie Lam was actually not in control over who made the final decision on whether to withdraw the bill. All of a sudden today, her press office released this video saying that they wanted to stop violence and restore rule of law and social order in Hong Kong.
NPR's Emily Fang reporting.
Yeah, that was great.
Pro-democracy protesters in Hong Kong are still planning new demonstrations. They're calling for an investigation into claims of police brutality against protesters. They want direct elections for Hong Kong officials.
Good.
This is NPR.
It's terrible what's happening in Hong Kong. They're just getting, slowly swallowed up. Over the next, I think it's by 2030, there doesn't have to be a two country or a one country, two systems anymore. I think it's by 2030. It's when that agreement with the British runs out. And you just see them getting slowly swallowed by this communist nation. I saw a meme yesterday, and I take credit for it. Millennials in China, in socialist countries, block the streets and are fighting for the freedoms that America has. And American millennials are fighting for the free shits they think they'll get under communism.
Now I'm talking about the first half of 2020.
Goss says consumer spending and confidence are high and unemployment is low, but that's not enough to offset worries about trade and tariffs and a global economic slowdown. Martin Moylan, NPR News.
A woman staying on an island in a lake that straddles the border between Minnesota and Ontario has been killed by a black bear. The 62-year-old woman was staying at a remote family cabin on Red Pine Island in Rainy Lake. A 5-year-old boy has returned home 5 months after he was thrown from a third-floor balcony at the Mall of America. The boy's family says Landon completed inpatient treatment. He was thrown nearly 40 feet to the ground by a stranger in April. The Minnesota Court of Appeals has ruled against a group of parishioners who want to save a central Minnesota church.
This grown-ass man threw this kid off the third floor of the Mall of America, which is the world's biggest mall, because women were rebuffing him. He got frustrated that when he was trying to pick up women at the mall, they were shutting him down. God.
Santina Lovelace is a member of Friends to Restore St. Mary's.
We're very adamant that we want that building saved, and we're aware that they are building a new church and we can't stop that process, but we want to keep the current church building and restore it as a group for the community of Melrose. We can use it for other things.
The state appeals court agreed with a lower court that the bishop has autonomy to decide internal matters. The parishioners group is considering an appeal. Kirsty Marone, NPR News, Brainerd.
In sports, the Twins play the Red Sox again tonight in Boston. The Twins beat the Sox last night 6-5. Minnesota now leads second place Cleveland by 6.5 games in the standings.
Twins are on fire.
And the World Cup winning U.S. soccer team beat Portugal last night 3-0 in an exhibition game in St. Paul. The game was one of 5 women's national team victory tour games. This is NPR News. It's 8:07.
Programming is supported by the Minnesota Corn Growers Association, working with the American Lung Association to support E85, a cleaner fuel choice developed to reduce harmful auto emissions. Visit mnfuels.com for an E85 station near you.
It's Morning Edition from NPR News. I'm Steve Inskeep.
And I'm Noelle King. Good morning. Hurricane Dorian has devastated the Bahamas, and the big question now is how to help people in places that cannot even be reached yet. Places like Abaco, where the national airport is underwater and aerial pictures show entire neighborhoods have been flattened. NPR's Jason Beaubien is in Nassau in the Bahamas. Hi, Jason.
Good morning.
How is the effort going to get help to people in places like Abaco?
So the effort is really just beginning. At this point, they're just trying to figure out how to actually get teams into these really hard-hit areas and start doing assessments. Yesterday, the Prime Minister, Hubert Minnis, did a flyover in a U.S. Coast Guard airplane just to sort of get a look at it himself. And this is what he had to say about Abaco.
Parts of Abaco are decimated. There's severe flooding. There's severe damage to homes, businesses, other buildings, and infrastructure.
And the thing is, they weren't even able to do a flyover over Grand Bahama, which has more people and potentially is even worse.
Okay, so that remains a big question mark. What are some of the big priorities for Bahamian officials and also for aid officials?
So this first thing of just figuring out how to land in these places. Both the places have their airports are underwater. They're looking for places where they can actually get some helicopters in. At that point, they want to try to figure out how to even assess what exactly the needs are, how they're going to get facilities in there. The docks have been destroyed, and from there sort of move forward. At the moment, there's no power. People are running out of water and food, and people are getting quite nervous.
Yeah, I guess I was going to say, I guess fresh water and food are probably two things that are going to be coming up over the next couple of hours and days. Jason, I know that you've been tracking Hurricane Dorian, and I wonder, what do we know about where it's headed next?
So at this point, it's heading, up the U.S. coast there, and the great hope is that it doesn't do what it did here. I mean, here in the Bahamas, you had sustained winds of 185 miles an hour. We've now, at this point, we still have tens of thousands of people who are completely cut off. They don't have cell service, and as we were saying earlier, people just are trying to figure out what are the needs. So we're hearing desperate calls from people asking about relatives, trying to find people. The death toll officially is at 7 at the moment, but even the Prime Minister yesterday was saying that that's absolutely going to go up. And the concern is that there are going to be years of recovery that are going to need to happen here. That the Prime Minister basically said that the Bahamas is facing right now the greatest crisis this country has ever faced, he said.
NPR's Jason Beaubien. Jason, thanks so much. Stay safe.
Thank you.
The Atlantis Resort in the Bahamas, with its pink spires and towers and pools, is for the moment the base camp for Jose Andres. The celebrity chef is running a food aid mission and rode out Hurricane Dorian at that resort.
My team and I, we think like we got at moments winds of maybe 80 miles per hour, maybe more. So they were very heavy rain.
He's thinking, of course, about islands that were far more heavily hit by the storm. He is about to embark to Abaco and Grand Bahama Islands, which have experienced vastly more destruction. This is what Jose Andres does. He tries to feed people after a hurricane. So you are in Nassau because you, to use a military term, you pre-positioned yourself. You wanted to be ready.
We are learning that pre-positioning yourself in a hurricane buys you precious time. When we're in the business of feeding people after a hurricane, sometimes in some parts, people, obviously they can be okay 1, 2, 3 days later. But for some people, sometimes 3 days is way too much. Some people don't have any food at home, or if they had, they lost it because the hurricane is absolutely nothing to what we know people were experiencing in Abaco and Grand Bahama.
So you're in Nassau, you're on a different island than the island over which the hurricane stalled for quite some time. What has it been like to be so near people in that kind of distress and yet in a way very far from them?
The destruction of in Abaco and Grand Bahamas is huge. So for us, that we are a small NGO, but that we've shown that we can grow like we did in Puerto Rico, like we did in Indonesia, in Mozambique, and adapt. This is a big challenge that we've never seen before. I hope that the experience and the training we had over the last 10 plus years of going to hurricanes and destructions, hopefully we will put all the know-how, because again, this is gonna have to be a very kind of different way of providing food aid.
Well, what did you do, for those who don't recall? What was your technique in, say, Puerto Rico, and what do you think you'll have to adjust for the Bahamas?
Well, hold on. We don't have any technique that is very difficult or very special. What we have is we have a lot of empathy. What's going to be different in Bahamas? That much of these two islands of Abaco and Grand Bahamas, still they are underwater. The airports still today, they are underwater. That has been a destruction like probably we've never seen in such a small space of land. The destruction in percentage of houses is being a huge percentage of houses damaged, and that's the challenge.
I guess in Puerto Rico you moved in here and there to a hotel kitchen, and one question is going to be: is there a kitchen that is in any kind of usable order, Grand Bahama or elsewhere?
Well, if it's no kitchen, initially we will try to be bringing the food daily, well, through a boat or a helicopter. We are working from Atlantis, which is a resort. Just for the record, I have a restaurant. I have a restaurant here. So we're going to start probably cooking here. We are already making sandwiches. It's amazing because we had many guests of the resort that they kind of stopped whatever their vacation, whatever they were doing, and they began coming, entire families coming to help us make sandwiches. When you see things like this, is really unbelievable. So we'll start making hot meals too. It's a very huge kitchen here, and at the end we'll have to do, an open kitchen campaign type of thing. I was very young when my father will start feeding people, making a fire in the middle of nowhere and a big paella pan. And my father will feed 100 to 200. That's about how many people came. So I'm going to keep the same spirit of my father and do exactly the same.
Well, Jose Andres, thank you very much, and please be safe.
Thank you, sir.
It's a beautiful thing.
A new investigation shows that low-income neighborhoods are hotter than wealthier ones in dozens of big cities across the country. This investigation is from NPR and the University of Maryland's Howard Center for Investigative Journalism. And it shows that the heat impacts physical health, but also that it might have an effect on mental health. Here's NPR's Nora Eckert.
In Janetta Churchill's Baltimore row house, the air conditioning is blasting. She relied on it more than usual when a blistering heat wave swept through Baltimore this summer.
I don't even want to see what my power bill is this coming month.
But keeping cool isn't just a matter of comfort for her. It's a way to manage her bipolar disorder.
Heat is a challenge for me when it comes to my mental health. When I get too hot, it's hard for me to sleep. And when I don't get enough sleep, that can trip me over into mania.
There are a few signs she's entering a manic episode: rapid speech, irrational purchases, or bouts of anger. Sometimes her episodes spiral more seriously.
I have at times had suicidal ideation, not attempt, but just my mind was racing so fast, it was out of control.
Heat can be a stressor for most people, but Ken Duckworth, medical director for the National Alliance on Mental Illness, says people with severe mental illnesses are hit harder than most.
The summertime heat waves are a risk for people with serious mental illnesses like schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, and bipolar.
One of the main reasons is medication. Drugs used to manage severe mental illnesses can have dangerous side effects in the heat, like dehydration or heat stroke.
They reduce your body's ability to modulate temperature.
For Andrea Landry Brown, these side effects hit hard. When she was living in California on one particularly hot summer day, she says it got up to 110 degrees. She was driving with her kids in the back seat when she started hallucinating.
I'm driving down the street and I literally saw people walking in front of my car.
It was a side effect of the medications she took for PTSD, anxiety, and bipolar disorder. She'd been sensitive to medications in the past, but she thinks the heat sent her over the edge.
The heat would just make it worse. Whatever the side effects were, it was just that much worse.
NPR and the University of Maryland's Howard Center looked at connections between heat and health in Baltimore. The Howard Center analyzed emergency response data from the summer of 2018 and found that calls for psychiatric conditions increased by nearly 40% when the heat index spiked over 103. Baltimore Crisis Response Inc. receives hundreds of calls every day.
Any psychotic symptoms? Are you currently hallucinating, hearing voices?
Their founding executive director, Edgar Wiggins, says although many of their patients experience mental illness, that's usually not the only health condition they're dealing with.
If you've got a chronic behavioral health condition, chances are you're not taking care of or managing your diabetes or your hypertension. So if you want to add to that temperatures of over 100 degrees with this vulnerable population, it really puts them at risk.
Wiggins says 3 out of 4 of their mental health patients also abuse substances. And according to the Howard Center, calls relating to substance abuse more than doubled in extreme heat. Dr. Duckworth from the National Alliance on Mental Illness says the risks of heat are only getting more urgent.
These are risks that you need to be mindful of as you contend with, what is likely to be an increasing run of extremely hot days.
And while climate change wasn't a big part of his training in medical school, he says it's impossible for the field to ignore now. Nora Eckert, NPR News.
Coming up on NPR News, British PM Boris Johnson's having problems in Parliament. That's one of our lead stories. We'll hear more after the break. St. Louis County Board of Commissioners is tired of shelling out thousands of dollars on stuff bought on Amazon. So the board is looking at buy local language in its purchasing rules. The board debated the language yesterday. We'll vote on a resolution next week that calls on county purchasers to make every effort to buy local. It's one of the stories that we are following. Phil will have more local news at the bottom of the hour in about 10 minutes at 8:30. Current time is 8:19.
Support comes from Highway Federal Credit Union, helping Minnesotans build strong financial foundations for over 85 years by offering consumer loans, mortgages.
That's interesting how hot weather would affect people on medication. I suppose it makes sense, when it's hot, your body's working a little harder than normal. I don't know. They had opened that segment about how poorer areas are hotter than more affluent areas, so I don't know why they brought that up.
Not much of a wind today. Out of the northwest, around 5 miles an hour. Overnight low should be about 58 degrees, and then tomorrow's high 78, pretty close to 80 degrees tomorrow, with a 30% chance of showers and thunderstorms in tomorrow's forecast. Friday looks dry, high of 75. Front comes through for the weekend. Saturday and Sunday, clouds, chance for rain both days, with highs only in the mid-60s.
Support for news comes from Westin Hotels and Resorts, offering a range of wellness options for guests, including their Eat Well menu, on-demand fitness gear lending program, and signature heavenly bed. Learn more at Westin.com, a member of Marriott Bonvoy. Progressive Insurance, committed to offering a streamlined shopping experience where home and auto can be bundled together. Now that's Progressive. Learn more at progressive.com or 1-800-PROGRESSIVE. And the Maine Office of Tourism, with wild landscapes and rugged coasts to inspire original lifestyles and authentic adventures, Maine offers travelers an opportunity to discover their very own Maine thing at visitmaine.com.
It's Morning Edition from NPR News. I'm Steve Inskeep.
And I'm Noel King. Good morning. Britain's Prime Minister Boris Johnson lost a dramatic vote in Parliament yesterday, and he may be on his way to losing another one today. Here's what's happening. Johnson wants to get Brexit done. He wants to leave the European Union by the end of October with or without a deal on trade, immigration, and much more. So rebel lawmakers in Johnson's own party blocked him. Frank Langford is on the line from London. Hey, Frank.
I know.
So this all went down in the British Parliament yesterday, and it was really striking. Tell us what happened.
Yeah, well, basically what happened here is Parliament took control of the legislative agenda. They voted to do this, and normally it's a very different system here in Britain. The system is the Prime Minister controls the agenda. And in order to do this, they had a vote, and they won by 27, which was a very comfortable margin. And today, I think tonight, they're going to vote on whether to block Boris Johnson from taking the country out of the European Union with no deal. If this eventually becomes law, the Prime Minister will have to go back to Brussels with not much time left to try to renegotiate, get a different withdrawal agreement, or be forced to ask for an extension again from Brussels, which would be the third delay on Brexit.
So how is Johnson responding to this rebellion?
Well, he refers to this bill that they're trying to push through right now as a surrender bill, as in surrendering to the European Union by removing any leverage he thinks he would have in negotiations with Brussels by threatening to just walk away from the EU. And he says if it passes, what he wants is to take this all back to the British people. And today, he was in the House of Commons, and he was talking to Jeremy Corbyn, the leader of the Labour opposition party, and he was trying to, frankly, goad him into accepting a general election. And this was what Boris Johnson, and this is how he put it.
Can I invite the leader of the opposition to confirm when he stands up shortly that if that surrender bill is passed, he will allow the people of this country to have their view on what he is proposing to happen, to hand over in their name with an election on October the 15th, Mr. Speaker.
Frank, what is the point of calling for a general election? What does he want to happen?
He has no choice. We've been deadlocked for 3 years in this country in terms of trying to move forward with Brexit, which is the biggest issue many people would say to face the nation in decades. Johnson just yesterday had a one-vote majority in the House of Commons. He lost it. So he now has no majority. He can't pass anything without help from the opposition, who doesn't trust him and doesn't want to work with him. And there was this moment, Noel, yesterday where this member of his party walked across the aisle and went and sat down with the Liberal Democrats, basically robbing him of his majority. And so what he hopes to do is have a general election, get a lot more people on his side when he comes back to the House of Commons, and then either ram through a no-deal Brexit or find a way to get a new deal with the European Union. But right now, he just has no power in Parliament.
What would the process be like for launching a general election?
It's kind of tricky. Under the way that Johnson wants to do this, he actually would need a 2/3 vote in the House of Commons. And we expect that vote probably late tonight, but it's not clear he's going to get it. Even though the Labour Party has said, we want a general election, we welcome this, they don't trust Boris Johnson. And what Jeremy Corbyn, the Labour leader, has said is, let's get this bill through, make sure it's a law, get the Queen to, sign off on it, so that we know we can block you from taking the United Kingdom out of the EU at the end of October. And then we'll entertain an election. And Corbyn earlier today, talking straight to Johnson in the House of Commons, had this to say.
If the Prime Minister does to the country what he's done to his party in the past 24 hours, I think a lot of people have a great deal to fear from his incompetence, his vacillation, and his refusal to publish known facts that are known to him about the effects of a no-deal Brexit.
No mincing words there. Let me ask you quickly. Johnson threw out the rebels who voted against him. He threw them out of the party. How's that going over?
Very poorly. It was seen as quite ruthless. One of the people he kicked out of the party was Winston Churchill's grandson. Boris Johnson has written a bio on Winston Churchill. He's a great hero of Boris Johnson's. And I think today people are kind of stunned by this.
NPR's Frank Langford, thanks.
Happy to do.
I love listening to British Parliament and them debating. It can get petty. It's raucous as hell. If you're interested, just look up British Parliament debates, because they get intense. They get crazy. And they really don't leave anything untouched. Guys, I am at work here. I am exhausted. But we're going to have a big productive day there. I will be hopefully uploading this before my office actually opens. So give me a like, share, subscribe. This has been another episode of The Shellin' Show. All right, thanks.